The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to a webinar series organized under a part of a campaign on clean energy transition, clean energy scenarios for clean energy transition. And this is also a part of a campaign organized under the Clean Energy Ministerial. And this campaign aims at promoting the wider adoption and improved use of long-term energy scenarios in guiding long-term transition to clean energy. Under this campaign, we talk about three themes. One is the using scenarios for better policy making and improving scenarios and building capacity within the government sector, all in the context of the clean energy transition. Today, we have two speakers. The first speaker is Tiina Koljonen from BTT Technical Research Center of Finland. She's a team leader of a team energy systems and climate research team. And she will be talking today about the topic 1 and 2, using scenarios and improving scenarios. And the second speaker is Mr. Thorsten Rüther. He's from German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. He's a deputy head of division on economic aspects of the energy Bende, scenarios, energy-related aspects of the European CO2 trading scheme. Each speaker has 20 minutes, 15 minutes for presentation, and 5 minutes for questions and answers. So the webinar will be recorded and shared through IRENA's webpage. So before we begin, I will briefly introduce you how to operate the webinar 500 user interface. So all the attendees are currently muted, and we will remain so throughout the webinar. And if you have a question, please send your question to us using the question section on the webinar panel. That can be done anytime during the presentation or after the presentation. Questions can be reviewed only by us and not shared with other audience. And we will be monitoring the questions throughout the session and select some to be answered by our panelists at the end. And due to our time constraint, we apologize in advance if your question is not answered by the end of the session. If you experience any technical difficulties, please try to reconnect by dialing in by phone. You can get the number by clicking on the phone option located on the webinar panel. You may also download the presentation slide PDF in the handout session. If your technical difficulty remains unsolved, you may write to us through the question section. We will try to help. So with this introduction, I would like to ask Tiina to start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Asami, for a nice introduction, and good morning, everybody. Like it was introduced, I will touch how Finland has been using the scenarios modeling in supporting policy making, especially in climate and energy issues. And then I have few final slides also how to improve the scenario modeling in the future and what kind of issues we have been working on. So the next, please. Okay, can you try to tick those, because the title is for some reason missing. Can you tick again? No, I'm not sure. It looks for my screen that the titles are missing for some reason. Can you say, Asami or somebody, if you are able to see?
We are not able to see. We will be switching it to PPT. Yes, just give a second.
Okay. So I will then take the slides from my computer and tell what is written in the titles. Okay, can you see?
You have it now there.
Okay, good. Yeah? So first, can you go back to the, yes, so this is the first one. Yes, yeah. So first, some background, the next please. Some background about the recent energy and climate policy strategy formulations in Finland. So lots of things has been going around during the existing government. In 2016, the new energy and climate strategy up to 2030 was launched, and that was accepted by the parliament in spring 2017. And in parallel to that strategy preparations, also so-called the first ever medium-term climate plan was prepared, and that was also approved by the parliament in the fall 2017. At the moment, we are preparing so-called low carbon strategy or low emission strategy up to 2050. That should be ready. Our work should be ready by the end of the January, and it is expected that the existing government will still make some strategy formulations, but it will be a tight schedule because the new elections will be in April next year. So let's see what will happen. However, VTT has had a so-called leading role in coordinating and carrying out the multidisciplinary research projects for impact assessments of the energy and climate policies and strategies. So for example, I personally have been heavily involved and also coordinating all these impact assessments, which are now there in the slide, and also coordinating the ongoing low emission strategy preparation impact assessments. And I will talk shortly about all of these in the next slide. So next, please. Still some background. So what is the 2030 strategy about? A lot of new targets were written in the 2030 strategy. As an example, it was said that the share of renewable energy sources should be above 50% from private energy consumption by 2030. The current share in Finland is already 38%. That percent was settled by the Commission, so that was the burden share for Finland related to renewable targets. But in addition to that, totally new targets were also set. As an example, it was said that we should reduce the use of mineral oil, so fossil oil, by 50% compared to the 2005 level. We have to increase the share of domestic energy sources above 55% by 2030 as well. And then this was one of the very tricky things also, to phase out coal totally in energy production also by 2030. And in fact, this is already now written in the new law, so this will really happen in Finland. And also to increase the share of renewables in transport up to 40% by 2030. Then the low emission strategy, which is now under preparation. The government is, and also it has been established a parliamentary committee to figure out when and how Finland should reach the so-called climate neutrality target. So it is expected that it will be before 2050, but the exact date is not settled at the moment. So next, please. So when like I mentioned, that Finland's VTT has been involved in all the impact assessments. So this is the framework of modeling and scenario assessments when we are doing the quantitative analysis. So this is an example from the 2030 policy impact assessments. So you can see that they are lot of different type of models. So if I start from the right-hand side, there are the sectoral models for transport, buildings, agriculture, waste management. We have like a energy system model. That is the core model of VTT. So we are using time energy system model. And the sectoral models, they are feeding some inputs to the times modeling framework. Of course, then we are having the general equilibrium modeling, so to calculate the impacts to the national economies. We have sectoral models for forest sector, that is especially important for Finland, so land use modeling to calculate what are the impacts for carbon sinks. And then that was the rather new thing to make the integrated assessments also related to the health. So also the impacts on other emissions than greenhouse gases, so especially the particulates and so, and they were also the integrated assessments related to the health issues. Next, please. So just on one example about the challenge which Finland is facing. The Commission has been set a rather tight target for Finland for the non-emission trading sector. So the burden saving sector, that is minus 38% greenhouse gas reduction compared to the 2005 level. And what really is needed, it was realized that Finland should reduce 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions or CO2 emissions in our transport sector. And this figures is from our times modeling scenarios and really shows the challenge. So you can see the situation in 2020 and then the emission reduction needed in the transport sector, domestic transport, which is there in the light blue. And in fact, after these kind of assessments were like published and realized, a parliamentary group was established to solve really the transport challenge. And in fact, the transport report was just yesterday launched. So the report said that Finland is really targeting zero emission transport by 2045. So that will be in line also to the 2050 assessments or mitigation targets, which is now under discussion. Next, please. And one example again, renewable energy is very important in Finland, and we are already one of the top countries on the EU level related to the share of renewables from final energy consumption. But in fact, when we were looking at this 50% target from final energy by 2030, it's in fact is much of happening because of the increasing volumes of our forest industry. So you can see in the bottom that you can see that most of the renewables in Finland, the origin is wood, and especially the side raw materials, biomass side materials from food industries. So that is the major renewable source in Finland. Next, please. So this was about the 2030 policies, but now I will move to the 2050 policies. And then because 2050 targets, we have a lot of uncertainties. We can establish a different type of pathways. So we have now carried out already one 2050 low carbon roadmap exercise, and now we are carrying out a similar type of exercise for 2050 policies. So in Finland, the scenario planning or modeling is only one minor part of this whole scenario planning process. So collaboration is a key element in our long-term scenario assessments. So at the moment, 7 ministries are involved. So they are 4 ministers from 3 government parties. VTT is carrying out the research for impact assessments, but there are also 2 other research institutes involved. There are a lot of stakeholder communication involved. And then we also include the perspectives of private consumers and citizens. Next, please. So in the left-hand side, you can see the roadmap process, which was carried out earlier. That was a long-term process, so it was the timeline was more than 2 years. This time we are having only half a year work, so it's very like a rapid process which is going on. So since last summer, we have now carried out already three workshops. We have made a consumer survey with 1,000 respondents. We have been doing a lot of communication with ministries and responsible ministers, and everything should be ready in end of January 2019. In these, both of these exercises, we have been looking at 4 alternative pathways. We are calling them growth, stagnation, save, and change. So different storylines for 2050 low emission or low carbon mitigation targets. Next, please. So if we are looking at the Finnish situation, this slide is only about 2 examples. So one of the scenarios called growth. So that is including huge digitalization, very rapid low carbon or green energy technology development and implementation, and so on. On the other hand, the save scenario is more about circular economy, focusing on energy efficiency, material efficiency. So these are 2 different storylines. But this is about, I wanted to show that what is really one of the key components in Finland, because we are having this lot of forest industries, we are using a lot of biomass. The option to use negative mitigation, the options like especially the CCS, carbon capture storage, linked to the bioenergy and also to forest industries, that is one of the key questions. So the growth scenario doesn't include the option to use negative emission technologies. And then on the other hand, the save, we have assumed that we have the option to use the negative mitigation technologies. And then on the other hand, there is a lot of discussion what's going around. So what would happen to the forest sinks? So in addition to the so-called LULUCF, so land use adjacent forests. So these are the 2 key components which is now discussed, that how much we are able to use our forest to have a sustainable pathways up to 2050. Next, please. So the last few slides is then about new research related to the sustainable energy transition and scenario modeling. What we have been doing recently is really look at the social science and humanities in energy system transition. So what we have been like, the traditional way of doing is more to focus on technical sides and also to the national or macroeconomical side. At the moment, we are creating new quantitative and qualitative data, which could be used and integrated, and also creating new methods and methodologies, how to really look at the social issues and especially the decision making. So decision making of private sector, but also decision making of investors. A second issue is the integrated assessments of material, energy, economy, and environment. So recently we have been especially focusing on selected metals in the transition of clean energy technologies. And then thirdly, we have been also running the global mitigation scenarios to well below 2 degrees. So I will have one example of that as well. Next, please. So this is, for example, one example what we have been modeling. Example of the focusing of electrification of the transport. So we have taken the IEA ETP figures from market share of electric vehicles in road transport, and then checked what the increase in selected metals looks like if we are looking at that kind of a market shares of electric vehicles. This is an example of a copper, because copper is used by electric vehicles 2-3 times more compared to the normal combustion engines. And what really is like eye-opening is that even though the copper is assumed like a normal metal, it's used everywhere, we are able to see already by after 2030 that the reserves could be like a bottleneck in increasing the market shares of electric vehicles. And in the longer term, also the resources could be a bottleneck if we are thinking about electrification. So this is only about the electric vehicles. We have already also looked at this other metals like cobalt, lithium, and so on, and we will continue also this kind of work next year. Next, please. And then this is an example of mitigation to the 1.5 scenarios. So we have created 2 pathways. The other one is so-called low carbon economy. So there we have assumed the technical options, including CCS, for bioenergy, forestation, and so on. But then we also created another storyline. We are calling that post-fossil economy. So that includes more options to for negative emissions. So we have also modeled the materials production from air with direct air capture. So of course the other options are also included. So these scenarios have been published. So there's in the bottom there is a article. If you are interested, you can read more about the global mitigation scenarios. The next, please. So this is my final. So just to summarize what we have been looking at and what are the conclusions about the next steps. So especially the integration of the energy and climate with other disciplines is required in the future more and more, especially the materials, so non-renewable materials in addition to renewables, water, and so on, and also to more integration of the human behavior when we are looking at the long-term scenarios. And we can see that there is this increasing challenge that the issue is becoming more and more complicated. So we are requiring more complicated models, which also creates new challenges in communication. But remind that the modeling is only one part of the scenario planning process. So there is a urgent need, and definitely we are needing the dialogue and open data, which also supports the dissemination and also increases the acceptance of new policies and strategies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tiina. We have some questions already coming, so let me pick some of them. The first question is about the process of engaging government. So we first of all, is VTT part of government, and does government have modeling capacity, or do they outsource it to VTT? So that's the first question.
Yes, thank you. VTT is government-owned research organization. We are currently we are limited, so we are non-profit organization which is owned by the state. So we are not part of the government, but but anyway, we are like steered by the state and the government. So there is a strong link between VTT and the government. Then about the capabilities of modeling, the ministries, they are like they are not having modeling capabilities as such. However, they are like having this kind of calculation methods which are used like when they are doing the reporting for the Commission, for the United Nations, and so on. So we are supporting the ministries like running the large models, and then like giving them the needed data. So as an example, when we were doing the 2030 policy impact assessments, the 7 ministries, they were holding their own data. So like Ministry for Transport, they are having a lot of databases for transport systems. Ministries for Economy and Employment, they are holding a lot of databases for industrial sector, for energy production and energy consumption, and so on. And then one ministry, so that is the Ministry of Economy and Employment, they are also putting all the data which are like held by different ministries. So like I mentioned, the 7 ministries have been involved in the process. But on the other hand, it's not only VTT, but also the other research organizations are supporting the ministries by creating the data which they are not able to create by themselves, and which require large modeling capabilities, and especially when we are looking at the long-term strategies, the 2050, and when we are creating the different pathways. So this is the process how the policy and policy impact assessments are done in Finland, and this is also having a long traditions. So this is not the new thing, so this has happened rather long time in Finland.
Okay, thanks a lot. We have maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Another question is how do you take into account sector coupling? So it's more about the scope of your scenarios.
So sector coupling. So TIMES modeling framework, that includes all the energy sectors and also all those sectors which are producing greenhouse gases. So then that is like our integrated model. So all those sectors are integrated, and then the optimization is done at the same time. But then on the other hand, when we are doing sector coupling to the some other sectors like land use, then that is done by soft linking the models. So our TIMES model is giving some input data related to the, for example, wood consumption for energy, transport sectors, or what is the expected wood consumption for forest industries, and that is then included as an input for land use modeling as such. Another example is when we are doing the soft linking, the energy system modeling with macroeconomic modeling. So that is also that the BGT's models are giving inputs to the general equilibrium modeling. So the models are more or less soft linked, and then to cover all the sectors in all the economy, and also all the sectors producing greenhouse gases. So the TIME model also includes not only CO2, but also the other greenhouse gases coming from, which are listed in Kyoto Protocol. And then, like I mentioned, when we are calculating the health issues, we are like giving the input data for emission calculations related to the use of different primary energy sources, and then different models then calculate the, for example, the particulate or NOx and SOx emissions, and then another models what are the estimate the health impacts. So that is the framework.
Okay, thanks. In the interest of time, let me just select two last questions.
Okay.
The first of the two is, how do you think energy and climate strategy would change with improvement in modeling? For example, including human behavior that you mentioned. And then the second question is, are results with negative emissions having an influence on Finland's support or funding for those technologies?
Yeah. Yes. Both of these are excellent questions, and these are really touching my daily life. In fact, of course, we are not able to model as such the human behavior. But what is happening at the moment, we are carrying out one EU Horizon funded research project. So we are looking at, so there are the surveys going on, collecting lots of new data from all the EU member states. We are looking at the like issues like, for example, new concepts like energy memory. It's, for example, like looking at the cultural issues. So what have already realized that when you are looking at the future possibilities to mitigate greenhouse gases, you really need to know about the cultural issues, and then you are, of course, you can make the assessments about the barriers, the dynamics. So what kind of what kind of speed of investments you could expect, and then a lot of new things are like collected at the moment, and I'm really looking for quantifying and then also to put them into our modeling framework and see that what kind of impacts we are able to see. But this has not started, but I think it's very important to also start somehow model the behavior. Of course, we can also do something when we are having the manipulating the rate of returns and that kind of things. But now we are more looking at the behavioral issues, cultural issues, and that kind of issues in different countries, and also to compare them. The second issue related to the bio-CCS, well, I guess that will be discussed, especially during this process. In Finland, we used to have rather large projects, research projects for carbon capture and storage. But the challenge in Finland is that we don't have any suitable source storage sites. So that means that we have to transport the captured CO2 somewhere to the North Sea, to Norway probably. So that's the thing. Then that issue wasn't solved years ago. So the research on CCS wasn't so large recently, which has also happened in many other countries. But now when we are looking the challenge for 1.5 mitigation scenarios, it's very sure that we have to capture CO2 from air. And bio-CCS is one of the options. So I hope that there will be some strategy formulations from existing government, and also we are looking for the next government, and then really make the strategy that what we should really do with the negative emissions. And then, of course, we really need to have these kind of demonstration projects going on. And especially we should also look at the policy framework, because now there isn't any incentives at the moment in the policies which support the bio-CCS and implementing that. So many issues are still open, but hopefully there will be some decision making next year, or some coming next years.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tiina. So now with this, I would like to thank you, and then we'd like to move to presentation from Thorsten. So Germany is the lead country of the SEM campaign, so we look forward to your presentation.
All right, thank you, Asami. My name is Thorsten Rüther. Good morning to everyone. I'm working for the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy in Germany, and they're in the division for energy scenarios and economic aspects of the Energiewende. We are working on scenarios, energy scenarios. We are overlooking the targets, the energy targets of the German Energiewende, and we are also supervising the effects of measures, how they contribute to fulfilling the targets. Our ministry is also supervising the regulatory agency for grids, or the authority for grids. And when it comes to energy, we are also supervising the agency for environment in Germany. Next slide, please. Here you see the target architecture of the German Energiewende. We have some overall goals like security of supply and the competitiveness of our industry, and prices for households, for example. But we also have quantitative targets when it comes to the greenhouse gas emissions for the years 2020 or per decade until 2015. You see in the left column, and these are, well, we derived from the Kyoto Protocol. And then we asked ourselves, well, what does it mean for the energy targets? How much renewable energy do we need? How much energy consumption can we save to reach the targets? And so we added these renewable and energy efficiency goals. And I want to show you two examples how we did this, how we use scenarios to derive these goals. Next slide, please. So the first example is the energy concept in 2010. As you saw before, we had these greenhouse gas emission targets, and we introduced energy efficiency and renewable targets. And we based these goals on energy scenarios which were done by the Prognos AG. And when you follow the link, you will find the scenarios. There's a lot of sensitivities to prove the robustness of these targets. As you know, at that time we also had a huge discussion about what to do with nuclear energy, and we decided to phase out in this energy concept, and the last nuclear power plant goes offline in 2022. So this was based on that energy scenario, the German government decided to introduce these energy targets. The other target that was right now under discussion is the 65% target. That's how we call it in Germany. It means that by 2030, 65% of the electricity consumption shall be supplied by renewable energy sources. Currently, we are at 36%, and this is highly disputed because, as you may know, we have problems integrating renewable energy sources into our grids. So we try, or we strive to reach the target. This is a part of the coalition agreement, and this target of 65% comes also from it's based also on an energy scenario which was made by Öko Institute, and they were looking into a scenario that reaches a greenhouse gas reduction of 95% in 2050. So this is, I would say, almost well below 2 degrees scenario for Germany. And the big question is how can we integrate renewable energy sources into the grid? And this is why we need more scenarios looking into this question. And this I want to show you in the next slides, please. Some of you may have heard of the specific problem, I would say, or challenge of Germany, that the supply of renewable energy is in the north by the windmills and wind parks, offshore and onshore, and the main centers of consumption are in the south and west. And so we need a grid expansion or optimization, and to get the electricity to the south, to integrate the renewables and to minimize curtailment. Next slide, please. And this is our planning process to the grid expansions. We have 5 steps. I want to just look into or show you the first 2 steps because they are scenario based. First of all, we're doing scenario framework. It's made by the transmission organization, transmission grid operators, and the regulatory authority, and they involve also the public. They are consulting the public. And in the second step, the network development plan is made also by these 2 players, and also everybody can contribite to this. And in the third step, the plan is amended by the parliament. And step 5 would be the approval and construction of each project that was agreed upon. Next slide, please. So the first step was the scenario framework, and what we do there is that's more like a medium-term scenario until 2030, 2035. It's tries to show what the possible development of the electricity sector is. It makes assumptions for demand, generation, the technology mix, also on the demand side, but also when it comes to generation, how much fossil power plants do we have left, how much renewable energies from which source do we have in that year, and we also look into the interconnector capacities to electric neighbors. Then the two players, the regulatory authority and the TSOs, try to evolve 3 scenarios to cover the bandwidth of assumptions, because of course the future is not secure. It's there's insecurity about what will happen, and they also find methods which they're going to make to apply. For example, when it comes to regionalization of these renewable energy capacities, how much in the north, how much in the southern part of Germany, how much are we allowed to curtail? So that's also an option of renewable energy integration into the grids. And what about redispatch options? So if we have this framework, the TSO will develop a network plan, and they first of all they are doing this with an energy-only market modeling, with an invest dispatch model. So they model the power plant park in the future, and what kind of electricity generation on which location is made will be generated in 2030. They're using a flow-based market coupling for the first time, and they come up with 3 scenarios with different transport demands between these transmission network nodes. So they have an idea about how much electricity has to be transported between plants, power plants, and the demand centers, consumption centers, for example, in the southern part of Germany. And then the second step, they will do the transmission network modeling. So they are looking into each and every line. This is only transmission level lines, and they try to optimize these lines, because like a better monitoring of these lines, so they can use more capacity of these lines. Then they try to reinforce lines, and the last step, they may extend the lines. This is called what we call the NOVA principle. And the result of this modeling is an expansion plan for each and every line. If it has to be reinforced, or if there even have to be a new line. For example, you may have heard of the high voltage direct current lines. There are 3 of them that are currently under planning, and we expect that with a 65% goal, there may be some more of these lines, and as you know, they are highly disputed in Germany. So there's local initiatives that do not want these lines. Next slide, please. So this is what we came up, or with what the TSO and the regulatory authority came up with, expansion plan end of 2016, and it was also amended by the Parliament in the Federal Requirement Plan. You see most of the time the lines are in the north-south direction, and these lines are were decided upon, and now they are in the planning process, and hopefully in a building process shortly. All right, next slide, please. Now I will come to the current state of long-term energy scenarios. So what we are working with, I guess it looks like many other modeling structures. This is one from Fraunhofer EASY and Consentec. They are doing research studies for us, for the Federal Ministry. They have a model family that looks very sophisticated, and I think it is. On the simulation side, we have the 3 models that model demands, like in the industry or in business, households, buildings, heating, and transport. There are 3 different models. They calculate the hourly load curves in the power and heating grids, district heating grids, and this is then given to the invest and dispatch model, the power ACE model. This power ACE model is also supplied with data from the renewable energy source potential analysis. This is what I will show you on the next slide in a few seconds. So this all comes into this optimization model, where the deployment of new capacities and the dispatch of existing capacities are modeled and optimized, and it also takes into account interconnectors and storage, and then a very sophisticated way of including the grids, because as you know, we have or as I just mentioned, we have a highly political discussion about is the grid expansion actually needed, and we wanted to show, or we wanted to assess whether it is, and we showed that with this model that the grid expansion is very cheap integration options for renewable energy sources. So we optimized the deployment of renewable energies and then calculated if it's still optimal when you take into account the grid expansion costs. And this is what why the high resolution dispatch optimization is needed, and the network expansion analysis. So this is also then with the arrows on the right side iterated with the other models, till it converges. So this is just give you a brief overview. This is a current state in Germany, but this is a highly sophisticated model. There are other models that that are, let's say, more basic, but this couldn't be done in the moment in Germany. So next slide, please. This is just the example for the resolution of the variable renewable energy source potential. So we have, Fraunhofer EASY has a model that divides or breaks up the potential in 6 by 6 kilometer squares, and looks into each of the squares how much potential there is. So they have the location and the, for example, wind potential in the model. Next slide, please. This is just an example of a demand model of forecast. In this point, in this case, so if you break up all the energy consumption into small pieces, like electricity consumption in fridges and households, then you can make an assessment how fridges will evolve and how many fridges there will be, and so you can make you can do a scenario on the electricity demand of fridges in 2030 or 50, and that's how you sum it all up and aggregate it, and then have a electricity demand, and most of the times hourly demand curves, which you can use in the supply models. All right, next slide. So how can we improve these models even more? What we found out is the integration of renewable energy sources is a challenge, and as we've shown that that the integration of the electricity grid expansion is a cheap flexibility options. We are now looking into the heating infrastructure, so we can also optimize the invest and dispatch in heating networks, so you can better integrate these variable renewable energy sources into the energy system. So as I showed you, right now we optimize capacity and power grid investment, and next step, and that is a very challenging step, is to integrate the heating networks into the equation. And why do we do that? Is because of sector coupling. We think that the district heating sector is, well, at least in Germany, is underestimated potential for sector coupling, and we are trying to look into this aspect even more in the future. And yeah, as I said, the low temperature heating networks like 60, 70 degrees and even lower, they are a good match for variable renewable energy sources like heat pumps. Next slide, please. So just to sum it up, well, we think the long-term planning is crucial for successful energy policy. As you know, the energy sector is of strategic importance, and that's why it is regulated so much. And foresighted energy policy can lower costs. You may all heard of these terms, avoiding dead ends and expensive lock-ins. In Germany, for example, we created a good investment environment, so renewable energy sources can profit from low capital costs. So we even have sometimes lower costs for wind turbines or wind power from wind turbines than in countries with higher renewable energy source potential because of this low capital costs. And yeah, as we seen, the infrastructure has to grow with the needs of the renewable energy source system. So this has to be planned well in advance. Yes, and of course, foresighted energy policy needs energy scenarios, and based on these energy scenarios, the policymakers can take informed decisions. Thank you very much. Next slide. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks, Thorsten, for the presentation. We have a few interesting questions. I tried to categorize them and ask a couple of questions together. First question is about scenarios from two different research institutes were used to make different targets. I think this was what you mentioned at the beginning. How does Germany choose which scenarios to use? The second related question maybe is someone, I think, from the open energy modeling community. So the open energy modeling community in Germany is now becoming sophisticated enough to run parallel analysis to the official network development plan. This is no longer public consultation, rather it's community partnership. Will this community analysis be welcomed or resisted? So these are two questions.
All right. Well, let's start with the second question. Well, it's let's answer them together. We have a different approach in Germany. We have lots of private institutions that do the research, and the federal ministry does not have any capacities to calculate energy scenarios. So these are always we always order these scenarios and these results. So what our goal is to keep this let's say broad academic institution and landscape, so we are sure that we don't miss anything. When it comes to the future, we know that developments are insecure. Technology costs may vary and develop in another way that you have expected. And if you have many players, that's what we think is that you cannot miss, or the chance that you miss a certain or important development is lower. When it comes to certain plans like the grid expansion plan, there are institutes that also calculate the grid expansion. That's true. the results of these institutes are mostly that we even need more grid expansion than we have planned already, and because these are scenarios that take into account shares in 2030, 2035, because they say, well, for the energy transition, we need to decarbonize the electricity sector even quicker. So these are all, let's say, target scenarios that reach the targets, and they say, well, that's a beginning you made, so it's a good start with the expansion, but actually you need more. That's what they say, and from a personal view, they are, I guess they are correct, but in the policy making, there are of course other dimensions that you have to get into the calculation or into the equation, and that's why I guess the expansion plans will never be as much, or do not include as many lines as the institutes will identify. And yes, there are even more research institutes than the two which I mentioned. Most of the times we are using all of the scenarios, and then we compare them and try to analyze where are the differences, why do they come to different conclusions, and when it's, then at the end it's a political decision. The 65% was a political decision, but there was a compromise, I would say, in the coalition agreement for the one party, and they wanted it really bad, and but it was based on a scenario because this party wanted more renewable energy sources for the 95% decarbonization transformation path. So sometimes you can only let's say show or the political decisions are based on these energy scenarios, but from the perspective of the energy scenarios, sometimes they are, well, now I'm missing the word, they cannot be shown by the scenarios as well. So maybe that answers your questions, hopefully.
Yes, thanks a lot. We have a few questions around the grid planning. The first question is Germany. So you talked about grid expansion to solve the congestion issue between North and South. But is Germany considering other flexibility options that are not grid expansion in order to solve this issue? For example, many parties are building what they call virtual power lines, which is using storage in order to avoid transmission investment. So related question is, do grid expansion scenarios in Germany take into account scenarios from neighboring countries? And are these interconnectors taken into account in the grid planning process? One more related question is whether you can actually have any recommendation regarding the trade-off between the grid expansion versus decentralized distribution, decentralized power generation options.
All right, thank you for the questions. Yeah, of course, we are also including storage into our models. When it comes to cost optimization, these storage systems are most of the times more expensive than the grid expansion. That's when it comes to optimized models, they are there in a lesser extent. When it comes to models that try to model the measures of the government, like these 10 measures, we want to try we want to reach the goals 2030. Then these scenarios will include more storage systems. So this is already, let's say, a political compromise of not going into the most cost optimized way, because grid expansion is highly disputed in Germany. So yes, we take all the interconnectors into account that exist in the 10-year net development plan that were agreed upon in the let's say the European TSOs. We have a partly big expanding transmission into other neighboring countries, and they are taken into account. When it comes to the recommendation between grid expansion or decentralized generation, Germany is going a middle way, I would say. We are for the acceptance of for the Energiewende. We are trying to do both. We have the photovoltaic distributed generation, as well as the wind generation in the north with the big grid expansions. Again, when we look in cost optimized models, these models often mostly decide that the wind turbines in the northern part together with the grid lines are cheaper in the end. One reason is the solar systems cannot provide energy in the winter. In the winter, the load is higher than in the summer. So how do you supply the winter demand? Let's say in the year 2050, if you build lots of photovoltaic cells, in these times you still need the transmission and the wind turbines, and of course gas capacities to if the sun or wind does not shine or the wind is not blowing. But still the load factors of wind in the winter is way higher, so you would need a lot of storage that costs a lot of money if you want to do the same thing with solar PV. So again, there's a cost optimized way, I would say, is the wind park in the north with a transmission grid. But for political reasons and the acceptance of the Energiewende, we are doing a middle way and also installing PV grids. That is also beneficial when it comes to loading e-mobility in the future, for example. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Maybe the last set of questions that's linked to the last point. So the need for electricity and grid infrastructure depend largely on the extent of electrification of the end-use sector. For example, use of EV, heat pumps. Are these options taken into account? And when you look at heat and building sector, how do you work together with other ministries responsible for these sectors? And related question, is power to gas also an option in Germany to reduce electricity grid extension by using the existing gas grid?
Yes. Yeah. Well, my personal opinion, and I think also the opinion, a spread opinion in Germany, a widely spread opinion, is that sector coupling is one robust transformation path to decarbonize the end-use sectors. So there are lots of technologies you can think of in the transport sector. Of course, it's everything that runs with electricity. That's the battery electric vehicles, but also power to gas for example, in the aviation, or hydrogen for trucks, but of course also train, electrified train and railway is also sector coupling if you want. In the heating sector, we include heat pumps, but also direct heating systems which already exist but can be used for, let's say, high or situations that are only occurring few times in the year, but with high capacity factors, like a big storm running over Germany. So you could use this capacity to heat, for example, these district heating grids, but only have a few and full out load hours. So you just would need, let's say, a simple heater, electric heater. Power to gas is an option that is discussed in Germany. In the scenarios, we see their potential, let's say, in a world with a renewable energy share in the energy system with 65–70% and above. Right now, these systems are very expensive. And of course, costs will come down, but from our perspective, we don't need them before 2030. So this is, most of the time, this will be, well, Germany is investing in this technology because we know we will use it or we will need it in the long run. But this will be research and development projects, and to get the costs down. I don't think there will be a big market introduction in the coming years. Still, the German public, or the informed public, let's say, are talking about it. So this is let's say, a technology which will come, but the question is when.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we went a little bit over time. So I would like to thank Tiina and Thorsten again for the very good presentations, and everyone for raising good questions. I would like to close with the announcement for the next webinar. So the next webinar is planned for next week, December 20th, at the same time as today. The two presentators will be Peter Boot and Paul Kostal from Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, and from Japan Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry, METI, Mr. Hiroyuki Ishida. So thanks again, Tiina and Thorsten, and I wish everyone have a good day, and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.